June is Pride Month, which is dedicated to celebrating the LGBTQ plus communities all around the world, but it's also an opportunity to challenge where things still need to improve. And it has been argued that within LGBTQ plus communities, transgender or trans or non-binary people are amongst the most minoritised. And Avery Hubbard, who is a Sheffield Hallam colleague, has joined me today. Avery identifies as trans non-binary, and Avery's here to discuss their own personal journey and their perspective on trans non-binary inclusion. So thanks very much for joining me, Avery.
Very nice to be here.
So firstly, can you just explain, what does trans non-binary mean?
So it's two separate things, but they're very much in a marriage together. Trans simply just means identifying as a gender other than the one that you were assigned at birth.
Okay.
And non-binary means identifying with a gender outside of like that strict binary of man, woman. It can be like neither or somewhere in the middle.
Okay, so it's quite a fluid concept that moves away from male, female.
Yeah, very much a spectrum almost.
Yeah. Okay. And am I using the right terminology when I say that you identify as trans non-binary or self-determined, or what's the wording that you would use?
I would say I identify as trans non-binary.
Yeah. Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey to identifying as trans non-binary?
Yeah, so I think I first started questioning when I was about 15, 16, and all that language was first introduced to me. I was like, I feel like this fits me.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have great friends back then, so I faced a lot of backlash, which then made me kind of just internalise it and say, okay, I'm going to live inauthentically as a woman and just push it aside. And then the first lockdown in 2020 came about, and I had much better friends. I had friends that are trans or non-binary, and I was talking to them about my experiences, and it really helped to validate that. And I think for about a year, just identified within my friend group before telling family, before telling work. So I really had like a grasp of who I was before then telling family and work.
And you mentioned there, if you feel comfortable talking about it, you know that probably the initial reaction from your friends initially wasn't particularly positive. I'm just interested in hearing a bit more about how that felt and what you experienced.
It was really upsetting to experience. They kind of said, "Oh well, non-binary is not a thing. You're either a man or a woman," and just really, really invalidating comments and judgmental comments. And it was like, I'm 15, I'm 16, I don't know myself enough. I'm just gonna bury it.
And what about the reactions from your family at the time?
My mum had a really good reaction. I think like my mum, my nan, my sister all had really good reactions, but my reaction from my dad and his partner was less than good. They initially were fine with it, but I think when it came down to it, they didn't believe my experience was a real experience. They didn't see me as non-binary. They still saw me as like a woman, as their daughter, whatever. And actually in a conversation, and I've not spoke to any of them since this conversation, they were like, man and woman belong together. You can only be a woman or you can only be a man, and it's women that get pregnant. And I was just like, I'm through with this. There was a bunch of other stuff going off, but I just didn't want to. And I had a really good friend who lives with me speak up for me and defend me, and I've just not spoken to my dad or any of that side of the family since.
Well, that must have been really challenging.
Yeah. It still bothers me some days, but I know I've got a really good support network with friends, family, work, the network. I know I have people in my corner, and I'm better than having to deal with that.
But the experience later on down the line was a more positive one. What were some of the reactions that you had from people when you did?
So the friends that I had that are trans and non-binary, when I was like talking about my experiences, were like, that's not a cis experience, right? That's a trans thing, right? And I was like, oh, like a light bulb had gone off.
Yeah.
And then friends that I have that are cis, they were all really welcoming. I had some nicknames that were like based on my dead name, and they're like, is this nickname still okay to use, or would you prefer we not use it? And someone was like, yeah, we can still use that one, it's far enough away. And some were like, actually, I don't feel comfortable with that still being used, and they all just took it and accepted it.
I think you mentioned earlier there was sort of difference in timing in terms of when you came out and told people.
Yeah.
How comfortable did you feel telling people at work, for example? Because I guess there's you talked about your friends that might have been outside of work maybe, but I guess it's sort of like it's perhaps a different thing to come out and explain that to some people at work in your work environment.
Yeah, so I think the first people at work that I told were the staff network, because I was already involved in the staff network and I knew that they were a great community, with it being the LGBT staff network anyway.
Yeah.
And they were all really accepting. And then I told my line manager, and she was brilliant. She was like, okay, well, what does this mean? Do you want me to tell the team? Do you want to tell the team? How do you want to go about telling everybody? Mm-hmm. And I just really appreciated that it wasn't just put on me to then tell everybody, but I was asked, what support do you need? Do you feel comfortable sharing this? Do you want to share this at this stage? You
started to talk about this a bit already, but what other support did you feel was available to you or not available to you at the time when you were when this was happening?
Definitely. So the staff network was a great support. They were great people to talk to and just bounce ideas off. My friends were really great supports, like trialing out names and just talking through my experience, and they were really great ears. I know that Say It were out there, but I didn't access that support. I think because I've worked with Say It so closely, I was like, I don't know how I'd feel about going from working with Say It to being a service user.
Okay, so for the benefit of people listening to this, just tell us a bit more about who Say It are.
So Say It are a youth charity. I think they work from 11 to about 25.
Okay.
There are two separate groups. One is a younger person's group and one is maybe adults, university students. And they are a support network for young LGBT people.
Okay, great. And we can put a link to Say It services in the notes that accompany this podcast. So that's great. Would you have any advice for anyone else who is currently considering their gender, perhaps thinking and feeling some of the same things that you were feeling back then? Is there any advice that you would give to people?
Definitely. I think reaching out to people who may already be trans or are the staff network, if you're a colleague here, just say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm experiencing, and have people go, no, I get that. It's an unreal feeling of, because I found it's quite isolating if you think you're the only person who feels a certain way. Mm. But for someone to go, yeah, no, I feel that, it just amplifies this feeling and gives you almost like a safety blanket.
That's great. And you felt that was a safe environment to be able to do that in?
Yeah.
That's probably really important.
I think having that safe environment to explore stuff and not being afraid to say, actually, I was wrong about this thing about myself. It's okay to change your mind.
Okay, and that's your advice to people who perhaps having some of the same feelings and experiences and thoughts as you had back then. What about advice for us as colleagues and perhaps for students, etc., who might be listening to this? Because I think, from my own personal perspective, trans topics and non-binary is not something that I'm particularly au fait with. So I think I would probably be concerned about saying or doing the wrong thing. What's your advice to colleagues who want to either find out more?
I think don't be afraid to say the wrong thing, because as far as I'm concerned, the intent is what matters more.
Okay.
Like, if I can, 9 times out of 10, I can tell if someone is coming at me with a malicious intent or not. I think we'll be providing some resources in the notes that follow this podcast anyway. I think checking those out and just coming to your own understanding of what gender identity is, what gender expression is, what all of these terms are, so that when people do come to you, you have like a baseline understanding, and knowing that a person's gender is their own experience. It's there could be, I think the population of the world is like 7 billion. So there's potentially 7 billion different expressions and identities of gender. Like, everyone has their own inward feeling.
Yeah, that's a really important message. And so we've talked a bit about your own journey. That's great. And what about the work that you've been doing as an employee of the university, for example, to kind of help to eradicate transphobia and try and share some of these experiences and this learning across the university?
Yeah, so I'm currently in the process of putting together some trans awareness training that has information on what the difference between gender identity is, gender expression, sex and sexuality and attraction, and how it can be applied to the workplace. And I'm doing that for DTS at the minute.
Okay.
And I'm hoping maybe I can roll that out further, maybe through Inclusive Hallam, or just putting that video out there so it can be seen by multiple people and everyone can have better understanding of what transness means.
And finally, I guess, is there anything, if people are listening to this and they kind of wanted to go and find out more immediately, are there any sort of books or resources or websites, or where would you direct people if they wanted to just find out a bit more about what we've talked about today?
So I think two really good resources are both websites. The Trevor Project have a really good article on being a trans ally, and the Genderbread organisation have really, it's quite simple, but I think it needs to be simple. A simple, like, visual description of what each of these different terms mean.
Okay, that's fantastic. Avery, thank you very much for joining us today and being so open and honest with us. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.